Welcome back to Season 3. This is Episode 11 of My Words, Our Journey. What If? The final episode. I'm Monty, your host. Let's begin with Chapter 34. The first piece of the miracle came quickly. Mitch was informed the judge at his trial had instructed the crime lab to test each and every cigarette butt for DNA samples. Originally, only a few were tested and came back with either Mitch or Aaron. They had no reason at the time to do further testing. That is, until now. Later that day, Luke stopped in to tell him someone would be staying close to Bridget at her book signing later this evening. They would need a sample of hers to compare to, if they found DNA not consistent with Aaron and Mitch. What if this was her only mistake? Could it be enough to find him innocent? Those were the last two questions Mitch asked himself as he drifted off. For the first time in a long time, Mitch slept soundly. 1 week later, he received news his emotional attorney could barely deliver. I know it took a while, but it was worth it. We have a match. He was as shocked as he had been at any point during the whole ordeal. There was no reason for Mitch to think this would go his way. He lost it. He let it all go, and for the next several minutes, he wept. And Luke sat, quietly, and took in the moment, the emotional outpour. Once Mitch regained his composure, Luke told him Bridget was probably at the police station being questioned. They would have to wait and see how she chose to play it. He could not think of any way for her to get out of this, but he was learning not to underestimate his ex-wife. So again, they would have to wait. Bridget could not believe what she was being asked. This had blindsided her. It had been so long, and she was convinced the truth would never be discovered. Now they were asking her how one cigarette butt had been found at the crime scene with her DNA? Without thinking this through, she could not come up with a quick answer. Mind racing, she could not think of any way out of this. The gentlemen in the room could see she was struggling. They wanted to push her, keep her from gaining her balance, her composure. One detective informed her she would take Mitch's place on death row. Another made sure she overheard him saying the crime lab should return with other evidence within the hour. Unless she was willing to talk and tell them exactly what happened, they warned her there would be no deal made later. And that is when Bridget decided to do the right thing. She was a smart woman and could see the writing on the wall. The survival instinct kicked in, and her only goal was to survive. She waived her right for an attorney and consented to being videotaped. Over the next hour, Bridget talked to the video camera. She would never look directly anyone in the eyes. Her head was either tilted towards the table or she would look straight into the camera lens. It took a few minutes for her to begin, but once she did, she bared all. She explained how she had learned about Aaron and Mitch's trip from one of the pair's drinking buddies, who Aaron confided in after finishing a heavy night of drinking. This drinking buddy was also the brother of the man Bridget was having an affair with. She explained that in the beginning, it was just a lot of talk, a way for lovers to get rid of an unwanted husband and make some money at the same time. She explained how their drinking and drug habits had escalated to the point where she was not thinking or functioning properly much of the time, and how it had become a financial burden since her lover and his brother expected her to do the majority of the paying for their vices. It had just come together when they were high and drunk, what they thought a perfect plan. She explained. The threesome had followed Ben home one night just to see where he lived. Mary was to be an insurance policy, just to make sure there was no questions whether her husband would be a hero or not. They did not plan on harming anyone. She explained that it was her lover and his brother who took the car and went directly to the bank. She also swore that she had no idea there was going to be murders. She stated that when she first heard the news on the radio about the robbery and the murder of Ben Wilson, she was scared, sad, angry, all at the same time. Bridget told police this is when the brothers started to distance themselves. She only signed on to help the plan of the robbery and framing Mitch and Aaron. Bridget insisted she never knew the brothers planned on killing the security guard, Aaron, or Mary. She also looked directly in the camera and said she did not know where the two accomplices were or where the money was hidden. They had simply disappeared. She swore she did not know where either the money or their men had gone, numerous times. This is why she had written the book. She needed the money. Bridget had become so addicted to some pretty expensive drugs over the past several months. Never breaking down, she continued to answer all the questions. She was trying to save her life. Watching the tape later, the district attorney would make a note. Bridget never once said she was sorry or showed any signs of remorse. The facts were laid out, and that was all. No emotion. That was an interesting woman. Being in courtroom for several years, he had been fooled by her and her alone. But watching the woman before him on the screen, he was amazed at how good she really was. To pull this deception, she had been a strong individual with no heart. Had she done enough to spare her life, or would the state still go for the death penalty? Bridget had agreed to a lie detector test. Unfortunately for her, she had not fared that well. According to the administrator, who had conducted over 300 of these exact tests, Bridget had lied about certain things. If the test was to be trusted, Bridget was telling the truth about not knowing where the brothers had gone. And when asked about loving her husband, to this she answered yes, and had been telling the truth. On the other hand, the test revealed Bridget had lied about knowing where the money was, and more importantly, about the murders. She had lied on 3 different accounts. Each time she was asked about the killing of Ben, Mary Wilson, and Aaron Walker, and she had asked several different ways over several different hours. Each time she lied. Not one could really blame her for trying. She was a smart woman, trying to save her life. Only time would tell how this would play out for her. Chapter 35. There was no reason for anyone to pay any attention to the Ford Crown Vic as it traveled down I-77. The light blue 1999 Ford was in fair condition, with nothing to make it out of the ordinary, cruising at just over 67 miles an hour in a 65. The passengers, on the other hand, were far from ordinary. It would have been no surprise to either man to find out they were wanted for armed robbery and first-degree murder. No surprise at all. Drake and Derek, as Bridget had known them, had been on their way to see Bridget when they spotted the unmarked car in front of her, Hamilton Realty. Bridget surely did not know how truly lucky she was. The brothers had already agreed to take care of one last loose end before leaving town. Their plan? Convince Bridget she needed to move her share of the cash, and then take her out and take her cash. It was strictly business. What she was going through now was nothing compared to what she would have gone through if not for divine intervention. When you're in the crime game, you have to be flexible. Nothing seemed to faze them, not even the feds. They just continued straight past the real estate offices and never looked back. There was never a doubt they would break Bridget if they had an opportunity. Without the drugs, alcohol, and support of the 2 felons, they knew it would not take long before she was singing, crying, and blaming them for everything. It was just human nature. It took a real special kind of a man not to crack under the pressure of the feds. With fake IDs in hand, the 2 hit the highway, heading south to start their new lives. Both regretted not being able to get Bridget's share of the money, but there would be a next time. They both knew it. Maybe they would try something like this again in Florida. It worked this time. At least for them. I wonder what the feds found that led them to Bridget. Derek finally broke the silence. I was just wondering the same thing. The news will have something on it within the next hour, I'd guess. Once we find what they have, we'll know what we messed up, and we'll know how to fix it for next time. Next time? What if? Chapter 36. Luke and Mitch were leaving the prison through the back. It was a door Mitch had been escorted through on several occasions in handcuffs over time of the trial. Somehow the media had learned the time of his release. Luke told Mitch that his story was all over the news every 15 minutes. They both agreed that was not the time to make a statement. Mitch just wanted to crash for a few days, watch TV, eat pizza, and have a beer or 4. After that, he'd meet with his attorneys and see where his life was to go next. Mitch was relaxed and ready for the next step. Luke had taken care of Mitch for the past 5 days. Mitch had no worries during this time. He was checked into one of the finest hotels, which had a fully stocked bar with beverages. He had smokes, and he had magazines. Room service 3 times a day, hot shower whenever he chose, and everything that he needed. His first order of business was to call the front desk and ask for a bellman to come to his room. When the young man appeared at his door, he was surprised to see Mitch standing there holding 4 cartons of Marlboro Lights. Mitch made sure the guy was over 18 and handed him the smokes. He asked the young man to take him down to the break room and put them on the table for the staff of the hotel. He explained he had no need for any of them. Occupying most of his day was exercise, sports news, and the Discovery Channel. Still, it wasn't enough. He was tempted to watch cable shows and see what everyone was saying about him, but he had promised Luke he wouldn't do that. He promised he would take the time to recharge, regroup, and take the time to let his mind get right. Today, Mitch was headed to meet his legal team. Luke had sent a car to pick him up and drop him off at the office door. Now he would have the opportunity to first thank them for all their help and support, and second, he had some questions, which would help him decide where his life was to go next. Luke and his staff did their best to answer all his questions. If they didn't have the answer, they said they would get it. But several of the staff members were taking notes to review later. He appreciated the people in the room, each and every one. He thanked the higher power that had led them to call Luke on that dreadful day. He went there looking for some answers, and he got them for the most part. What he did not plan on was some good news on another front. Luke had informed his client his Monte Carlo had been restored. It was being cleaned up and ready for a road trip whenever he wanted it. He had just assumed his ex had sold off his toy. Mitch would find out later that Luke had filed a petition to stop Bridget from selling any of his property until at least the trial was over. With $12 in his pocket, Mitch walked out of the building with his attorney and newfound friend. Each ordered 2 franks and a soda from a street vendor a block away. That was Luke's favorite quick lunch, and Mitch was pleased. He wanted to buy Luke's lunch, and lucky for him, his attorney was a cheap date. Driving had always been one of Mitch's passions, so it was no surprise that he decided to take a road trip sooner rather than later. With a map, a small cooler, his last credit card, and his Monte Carlo, he was heading out of the city for an extended road trip. His legal team needed time to complete their work. He had informed them he wanted every possible avenue explored. Anyone and everyone that could be sued for his time in prison, he wanted them sued. Even if it was a long shot, he wanted someone to pay. If he lived by a strict budget, he'd be fine until his return. He'd make some calls while on the road and make an effort to find employment. This had been in his attorney's request. One way for Mitch to gain compensation was to prove he could not get a job because of his false arrest. That should be easy. Mitch had already talked to his old firm, and they only made excuses why he could not return. As he pulled into his old neighborhood, Mitch saw the for sale sign in his front yard. He had known it would be there, but it still made him sad. Luke had known he would not be able to return. Knowing how he was handling things so far, Mitch could only assume his belongings had been boxed up and stored. He would worry about that stuff in 3 months. He had a more important task at hand. If he thought too much, he'd back out. And for the past 5 days, this had been on his mind. If he did not do it now, he knew he'd regret it. Knocking on the door now seemed wrong. Maybe he could make his way back to his car. Too late. "Oh, Mitch, it's good to see you." Julie leaned out her front door to give Mitch a hug. "I wasn't sure you'd see me. I know this whole mess has been hard on everyone. Losing Aaron and finding out your best friend was behind all this must be devastating. How are you holding up?" He could not take his eyes off her. Even in jeans and a pullover, she looked wonderful. He snapped out of it as she spoke. "Is that why you stopped by, Mitch, to check on me?" "If so, I'm adjusting to it all." There was an awkward pause. "I see your house is for sale. I've thought about doing the same thing. I found an apartment I liked last week." "So sorry, Mitch. Would you like to come in?" He wanted to say yes, but he knew better. "I better not, Julie. I did come to check on you. There was more than once I thought about calling. I also wanted to ask you something. I just don't know how, I'm not sure how you'll take it, so I'm just a little nervous." She touched his shoulder. "Mitch, after I thought long and hard about your part in Aaron's plan, I realized you were just trying to be a friend. You supported my husband even when I truly believe you thought he was doing the wrong thing. That takes a special kind of friend, Mitch, a special person. I forgave you a long time ago. So please ask." Clearing his throat and taking a deep breath, Mitch let it out. Julie, this will more than likely take you by surprise, just like it did me. I'm taking a road trip. 3 months, I think. Enough time for my attorneys to sell the house and file some papers. Well, while I'm away, I'd like for you to consider having dinner with me when I get back. I mean, I know it's crazy, and I tried to put it out of my head and all, but I never could. Mitch had lost eye contact with Julie somewhere in his speech. Now he looked into her eyes for a sign. Instead, he saw a woman who did not know what to say. I can see I made a mistake. I'm so sorry for this. Really, really. I'll have my lawyer check in on you in a while. Is that okay? He had taken 2 steps back towards the car. Mitch, I wouldn't be lying if I told you I hadn't thought about you over the past few months, and I still don't know the answer. This is not a conversation I ever thought I'd be having, ever. She began to cry softly. Mitch did not know what to do. He wanted to comfort her. Should he hold her? Would she move away? His answer came when she slowly moved into his arms. It felt good. Mitch liked where he was right now. He put one hand on her back and the other on the back of her head, where he rubbed her hair softly. They both needed this, he thought to himself. You should go, Julie said as she moved away and headed towards her house. He was heartbroken. She had rejected him. This had been a mistake. Turning to walk back towards the car, he felt he was being watched. Turning around, Mitch saw Julie standing at her doorway. She smiled and said, Call me along the way. I want to hear how your trip's going. She looked down at her feet and finished her thought. Then we'll talk about how far out of town we'll have to have a quiet dinner. Smiling, she turned and went inside. Mitch was left standing in silence. This had been a good idea. A really good idea. Traveling down the road, he considered how his life would be. There were only a few things Mitch knew to be true. Eventually, he wanted kids. He wanted to do something he enjoyed for his next career, and he really wanted to have dinner with Julie. There was also one more thing Mitch knew for sure. Knowing his ex-wife, Bridget still had money from the bank hidden somewhere. This, according to the court records, would be roughly her cut, $900,000. It was surmised the real robbers had somehow known the bank had just received a rather large deposit that was scheduled to be picked up an hour after the robbery. Others just thought it was dumb luck. Either way, it had worked out in their favor. If she did take her fair share, Mitch thought he knew where she may have hidden the cash. What if? Chapter 37. Luke had not wanted to take any time off from work. Even one day out of the office was bad enough, but Luke had not been able to spend much time there over the last 8 months. That is actually what had convinced him to take a week to recuperate at home. Everyone from his office and at home had told him one more week could not make that much of a difference in the big scheme of things. But a week at home could make a world of difference to his mental and physical health, not to mention his family's well-being. On Thursday morning, he'd gone for a long, slow jog, had taken an even longer shower, and relaxed in front of the bay window, catching up on magazines. He only had about a half a dozen subscriptions, but when you're at home for less than 8 hours a day, total, there's not much time for reading. He would have probably spent this time out in the shed, but his wife thought this would be a more relaxing endeavor. About halfway through the third, he decided a couple of these would not be renewed next time. Something caught his attention outside the bay window, and he put down the 5-month-old copy of Hunting and Fishing. The mail had just been delivered, and Luke could not recall the last time he had just enjoyed walking to and from the mailbox. It was the simple things he missed the most. He had even tried to put the family's financial crisis on hold while he regained some kind of normalcy to his life after the trial. For the most part, it had worked. Not until he reached into the mailbox and withdrew a stack of what he knew to be bills from within did his heart sink for the first time that day. The weight of the mail was small compared to the weight it placed upon him inside. Luke had never been wealthy, not when he was living at home, not when he got married, not any time since. He had always had to worry about finances. Only over the years, it had varied in degrees, until he had received that fateful call from his new friend Mitch. The degree of stress had been small at that time, probably the smallest in his memory. Not one of the second, third, or final notices were going to be opened today. There was a good chance they would end up beneath his bathroom sink until a later date. He didn't want his or Lucy's day to be ruined by the mail. He was glancing through the small stack to make sure the essentials weren't in jeopardy. His list of essentials were probably the same as anyone else's in his current situation: electric bill, insurance, mortgage, auto loan, and the phone. Phone was the only one on the list because he didn't want anyone trying this number and getting through to a recording saying it had been disconnected. That could start some questions. A purple package addressed to Luke was at the bottom of the pile. The return address said Mitch Lipton. Luke was sitting alongside the driveway staring at the contents, not sure exactly what to do. He had reread the card for the umpteenth time. Luke, my friend, there was no good reason for you to trust me, but you did. I can only guess how that decision affected the other aspects of your life. This money is only a small way of me showing how much I appreciate everything. Only two requests. Do not feel guilty. I don't. And you must take at least 50,000 of this and buy a decent car. You deserve it. It was signed, I'll see you in a few months, Mitch. When he finally counted the cash, there was just under $476,000. Lucy took a seat next to her husband as they sat in the front yard. She could only imagine what letter must have come in the mail today. It had been her hope to get there first and shield him from the bad news that had come on a daily occurrence lately. She looked forward to Sunday every week just because the mail would not arrive on that day. Placing her arm around his shoulder, she had no intention of interrupting his crying. She was just a strong believer that crying was a healthy release. While she was waiting for a sign from him, he placed a purple box into her lap without a word. She took the lid off the box, hesitated only slightly, and began to count. Before she had even gotten very far, she heard just shy of $476,000, give or take a few hundred. In silence, the couple remained sitting on the corner, Lucy thanking the Lord for answered prayers and for Mitch, and wondering how much a new Chevy Tahoe would cost. It would never be talked about, not even years later. Neither felt it was necessary. Each would make peace with the fact of where the money had come from, and neither believed Mitch had anything to do with the original crime. With all obligations paid in full, no credit card debt, and a slightly used but fully loaded Tahoe in the driveway, Luke stared out and made a decision he hoped his wife would understand. I'd like to check into pro bono work on Monday. See how that whole thing works. What do you think? Chapter 38. You must be lost, the somewhat handsome man spoke as he approached from the left. Suzanne had been shopping for her mother's birthday present in this particular section of the store when she was approached by the stranger. She felt uncomfortable by the way he stared at her, as he walked up a little too close for her liking. Taking a step back, she folded her arms across her chest, tilted her head to the left, and gave the stranger a patented, "What do you think you're doing?" look. Trying to seem charming, the man took a step back himself, laughed apologetically, and raised his arms as if to say, "Sorry." I'm sure that must have sounded pretty bad. It's just to see such a lovely lady who obviously takes care of herself, well, it just took me aback. I would have expected to find you looking in the petite section, not the plus sizes. The man made a move to walk away, then decided to take one more stab at it. You're a beautiful woman. Truly sorry. I can see I offended you. With his best smile, he took a small bow and begged for her forgiveness. As he walked away, Suzanne could not help but sneak a peek. The stranger did not turn around, and she watched him head off towards the automotive department. Never to admit in public, she was a little more than flattered. It had been a long time since anyone had tried to pick her up. As she was deciding what to get her mom for her big 6-0, the stranger had met his accomplice in the new tire section of the store. Standing next to each other, looking at a pair of white walls, the man Bridget had known as Drake spoke first. How'd it go? Did you make contact? Derek did not look at his brother. He spoke in a low and even tone. We're on. Find her in the store, and let me know where she is, and how I should bump into her again. I want it to look real. Direct me so I'm not even looking up as she sees me. Let's see if she bites. The pair had been running surveillance on Miss Suzanne Riley for over a week. They did not like surprises. She had been chosen for several reasons over their other potential victims. Most importantly, from what they could tell, she had currently separated from her husband, who happened to be a driver for National Bank Security Transport, a company that handled moving large amounts of cash between locations in Jacksonville, Florida. It did not hurt that Derek also thought she was very attractive. Through the tiny earpiece in his left ear, he could hear his brother describing where his next encounter should take place. Taking a calculated risk, Derek headed straight to the book aisle and quickly found a new release he had actually already read. As he approached to read the back of the cover of the interesting book, he waited to see if he had been correct. After our first meeting, I would have thought you weren't a reader. Bingo, he smiled to himself as he looked up with a little less interest. Suzanne was standing next to him and waiting to hear his reply to her insult. I probably deserve that. I'll take my book and go. I just hope there's a lot of pictures. Not the response I was expecting. You don't have to go. I'm just looking for a good book for my mother. He was in. The two brothers had kept up with the trial in Virginia. They were well aware of what had happened to Bridget. They were also well aware of how she had sung her song trying to save her life. To them, it was nothing to worry about. She had no idea what their plans had been after the crimes, and she did not give very good descriptions of the pair. They had seen sketches on the television and in the papers, and both agreed they weren't very good. What troubled them a little was the fact that she had lied about their share of the money. In several articles, they had seen where she swore she didn't know where any of the money was. Knowing that was a straight-out lie, they would have liked to have gotten their hands on that money. Only two small problems. No idea where she would have hidden it, and it was probably not the smartest move to go back north any time soon. This had led them to the shopping center. It was not a cheap living on the run, and both men liked to spend money. Their share of the robbery would not last them for the next 6 months if they didn't slow down. So they decided to make one more run at it, and then take a well-deserved break. If they played their cards right, Suzanne would help them, unknowingly, steal twice as much as they had gotten from Ben's bank. Chapter 39. As she walked around the yard, picking up branches and twigs from the many different trees spread throughout the yard, Julie wondered what the future would hold. Because of the evil in others, her life had changed forever. Her mother had always told her what a strong woman she would grow up to be. She wondered if her mom would be proud of her now. She imagined her looking down from heaven, wishing she could be there to hold her daughter's hand and make everything all right. There had not been anyone to look at the house in quite some time. The realtor, in her defense, had scheduled 2 open houses over the last few months with no luck. Not even one person stopped by. Twice she had thrown away a tray of cookies and soft drinks she had prepared. It did not look good. While it was a nice neighborhood, unfortunately, Aaron and Julie had not been able to put down a big down payment on the house, and during one of their financial rough spots had taken out a second mortgage to help. What she was asking for the house was just what she owed, and still no takers. 2 incomes had made it possible to make ends meet. Today, with only one income and a small life insurance policy that was dwindling, she was unsure what to do. That was the main reason she was still in the house she had shared with her deceased husband. She could not afford to go anywhere else. She had done the math. It just didn't work. While she was still keeping the creditors happy for the time being, it would not be long before she'd have to start picking and choosing who to pay each month. There was no more credit cards to use. From inside the house, she could hear the distant phone ringing. There was no way she could make it, so she didn't rush inside. Instead, she finished her yard work, filled the bird feeders, and made sure the bird bath had fresh water. Hi, Julie. This is Amanda. I finally have good news. I wasn't sure I'd have the pleasure of making this call. Julie, we received your offer on the house today. They're willing to pay you what you're asking, plus all the closing costs. To tell you the truth, I was a little shocked. But anyway, give me a call when you can. They've already had a messenger deliver a certified check for the full amount. Call me. It was the 3rd time she had listened to the message from her realtor, sitting on the edge of the sofa, not sure if she wanted to call back right away. She was afraid somehow this was a cruel joke, and she didn't want this feeling to go away. If it was true, her prayers had been answered. At the same time, Julie was listening to her messages for the second and third time. Someone else was receiving good news as well. An hour and a half away, Gretchen Cox was answering the phone. The caller ID had told her it was the specialist's office, the one they had taken Maggie to on several occasions. She was afraid they were going to talk to her about being behind on the payment she had promised to make to the center. Even her and her husband working any overtime they could get, along with the checks her father had signed over to them each week, it was still a struggle to keep above water. Last week the refrigerator stopped working. It had been a good one, but the timing could not have been worse. She had to make a choice, and she had chosen to buy an inexpensive, small refrigerator on sale rather than pay one of the smaller credit card bills and the specialist. Gretchen, however, could not take the chance that the call may be important information about Maggie, so she answered on the 12th ring. Instead of hearing how she neglected her responsibilities, Gretchen was being told by the receptionist that an unknown donor had stopped in and paid off her due bills, and had left a check to the center for nearly $300,000 to help with Maggie's treatments. She had so many questions, and the receptionist had no answers. Once off the phone, she thought of several people she needed to call, starting with her loving husband, who was on his 9th day in a row of 12-hour shifts. Instead, she slipped down the wall of the kitchen and wept. She wept for her father and for her mother, and she wept for her daughter. She wept because she was sad and happy, all at the same time. Chapter 40. Mitch felt good about his trip. He felt good about his good deeds, and he did not feel guilty one bit. He was not sure why Bridget did not tell them where the money was. He had long ago stopped trying to figure out her motives. He had no intention of going to her trial or even following it in the news. As they say, that chapter had closed. All he knew was that he was going to put the money to much better use than she or her accomplices would have. After spending about an hour and 40 minutes at her grandparents' run-down old cottage, he had found the money in 2 duffel bags that had been triple wrapped in tarps. It was the only that she'd feel safe leaving the money behind. The land was not good for farming, hunting, or hiking anymore, so there was never a reason for anyone to be in these parts, or anywhere near. And the road, if you could call it that, had grown up over time to where it was almost non-existent. There was never a doubt what he would do with the newfound cash. It was never an option to take the money and run. There were a few good people that had helped him along the way, and he was going to do his part in return. Not once did he hear Luke speak of his problems outside the court. Not once did Mitch get any vibe from his attorney, the toll the whole mess was taking on his personal life. He had seen the physical toll, and could only guess of the emotional stress. But it had taken one of the other members of the team to tell Mitch of Luke's hardships and the way that his family and friends were helping out. Mitch knew this must be hard on his new friend, so he never said a word. Because really, what can words do? They certainly weren't going to pay the electric bill. The money was just a small gesture to show Luke his appreciation. He had already decided he'd be sending more care packages along the way, maybe a souvenir or two from each of the interesting stops and towns he visited along his trail. During the trial, he had felt so sorry for Ben and Mary's family. They did not deserve any of what had been brought upon them. Mitch knew if he ever had the opportunity, he would help their sick granddaughter any way he could. Another great way to spend some of the money. And then there was Julie. He did not initially plan on buying her and Aaron's home. He still had one to sell of his own. No, it was not until he had really started to think about how this whole thing had affected so many people that he realized the enormous stress she would be under. Aaron had told him before how money would get tight around their house, and now he could only imagine. They had had the same life insurance policies through work, and it was not very much, and wouldn't last very long. This is when he decided to buy the house through his attorneys. He never wanted her to know who had purchased the home. And that ends our story. I sure hope you enjoyed the journey. Thank you all so much for listening. And yes, there will be a season 4 coming in the near future. Have a great day. Thanks again.